The race to the bottom is well lit and very clear, and we've been indoctrinated to go down it. How do we make things faster and cheaper? How do we process human beings? And if they don't meet standard, send them back a year and reprocess them. That's so normal. We're like fish who don't realize they're in the water. But it's not the only way forward. In fact, plenty of data, science, economics, and definitely philosophy say that the race to the top is far more substantial and interesting and lucrative. We don't say this is as cheap as it can get. We say this costs extra, but it's worth more than it costs. And we create the environment for people to thrive, to have the best job they ever had. And I do think it's a choice between the two. I think it's very hard to compromise and do half of one and half of the other.
Welcome to the Work for Humans podcast. This is Dart Lindsley. Industrial capitalism treated workers like marionettes, breaking down work into discrete, disconnected, repeatable actions. It loved uniformity, and it developed methods of employee surveillance to make sure that everyone did what they were told. Seth Godin's latest book, The Song of Significance, challenges us to shake off those old mental models, many of which are still baked into how we work, and reach for something a whole lot healthier. What if your company could say it created the best job each employee had ever had? A company that employees would miss if it was gone, where employees know that they can work independently, build important things, and routinely surprise themselves with how much they can accomplish. Seth Godin is a highly influential author, entrepreneur, and marketing expert. He's written 20 best-selling books that have been translated into more than 35 languages, including Permission Marketing, Purple Cow, and most recently, The Song of Significance. His TED Talks and personal blog have amassed millions of views, and his online workshop, altMBA, has empowered thousands of professionals to drive meaningful change into their industries. Seth's company, Yoyodyne, created the first ethical commercial email and was later sold to Yahoo, where Seth became the VP of Direct Marketing. He went on to found several other successful companies working with clients such as AOL, Microsoft, Penguin, and Random House. To celebrate the 100th episode of Work for Humans, I'm going to be bringing back a few listener favorites from the first year of the show and shows that changed the course of the podcast. This conversation with Seth is both. In this episode, we discuss the Song of Significance and how to fight against the system to create valuable and purposeful work. We talk about the long-lasting effects of the Industrial Revolution, the power of small connections in marketing, false proxies in the hiring process, one HR strategy that's been shown to lower turnover and increase productivity, and much more. All right, as always, if you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. And now, my conversation with Seth Godin. Seth Godin, welcome to Work for Humans.
Thank you for having me. I don't think there's any podcast that covers the work I've been doing recently more cogently and clearly than yours. So thank you for doing it.
I am so pleased to hear that. And it's funny because reading your books, and in particular reading The Song of Significance, I felt so much intellectual kinship. It was just remarkable and such a pleasure to read.
I will tell you a slight aside. Do you remember the movie Soylent Green? It was based on a short story by Harry Harrison. And years ago, in my 20s, I did a line of science fiction adventure games with Ray Bradbury, Arthur C. Clarke, Michael Crichton, and others. And I was about to do one with Harry Harrison. And Harry and I were drinking tequilas, well, he was. And I said to him, I did this with Michael Crichton. He said, I don't speak to Michael Crichton. I said, really? Why? And he said, because I spent a year of my life writing a book. And when I went to the post office to mail it to the publisher, the Andromeda strain came out right at the same time. And it was a pre-steal. He pre-stole all my ideas. So I had to throw the book in the garbage. And he had never met Michael Crichton, but he wasn't speaking to him. Anyway, I'm glad you're still speaking to me. So thank you, Darren.
I feel like it's a movement. I mean, I feel like it's something that everybody needs to pull together on. It used to be that I would worry about other people getting an edge or something,
Right.
But it's not like that at all. So we need to get into your book, The Song of Significance. But I'll tell you that I feel people approaching the topic of the Song of Significance from different angles. Lots of different authors, radically different authors from different angles. I hear it in Margaret Heffernan, who we've had on the show. I hear it in Gary Hamel, who we've had on the show. I hear it in Alex Komorowski. And I hear it in people like Christopher Alexander, the architect, or even John Boyd, the military strategist. So there's a lot of people who are coming at this. But when I was reading Song of Significance, I felt it afresh and I heard it in a fresh way. And so I want to get into that. The Song of Significance, you describe a choice that's before us. What is that choice?
It's the race to the bottom or the race to the top. And the race to the bottom is well lit and very clear. And we've been indoctrinated to go down it. How do we make things faster and cheaper? How do we ask, will this be on the test? How do we process human beings? And if they don't meet standard, send them back a year and reprocess them. How do we make it faster and cheaper without regard for side effects or effects? And humans are a resource. Henry Ford came up with the idea of human resources because they're just like machines, except they eat lunch. And that's so normal. We're like fish who don't realize they're in the water. But it's not the only way forward. In fact, plenty of data, science, economics, and definitely philosophy say that the race to the top is far more substantial and interesting and resilient and useful and lucrative. And when we race to the top, we don't say this is as cheap as it can get. We say this costs extra, but it's worth more than it costs. And we create the environment for people to thrive, to have the best job they ever had. And I do think it's a choice between the two. I think it's very hard to compromise and do half of one and half of the other.
I want to talk about the different songs that you describe in there. One is the song of increase, one is the song of safety, and one is the song of significance. How do those build on each other?
So my friend Jacqueline Freeman, who's a feral beekeeper, that doesn't mean she's feral, it means the bees are, wrote a book called The Song of Increase. And in it, she describes what happens in a beehive at the end of a long winter. All the honey is depleted, things are run down, they barely made it. But the maidens will send a message, organizing without an organizer, leading without a leader. And within just a few weeks, the worker bees will have collected enough pollen to replenish all of the honey. Then they'll say to the queen, please lay another queen egg, which is very rare, and fertilize it. And just before the new queen is born, in less than 15 minutes, 12,000 bees will swarm and all leave the hive at once. They will leave it forever, and they will land in a tree about 100 feet away, forming a tight ball. Because in this moment, they switch from leaping forward to singing the song of safety, which will sound familiar to a lot of people. They have to maintain a body temperature, 98.6, and they don't want to be disturbed. They don't want to extend themselves. They just want to get through this. They'll send out some scouts, and if they're very good and lucky, they'll find a new place to live and they will survive. They will never return to that hive again. They took a leap and then they made it. And even though we're not bees, we have a song as well. And it's the song of significance. It begins with this leap, but it's also about finding meaning, logotherapy, about showing up with a reason. And it turns out when people have that, work doesn't seem like work anymore. It seems like part of what it is to be alive.
And I want to talk about these two different ways of looking at the world. You talk about the industrial mindset on the one hand, and then the song of significance mindset on the other. For sure, the song of significance mindset sees people whole, as whole creative beings, as opposed to things to be used. And by the way, I've had both ideas in my life. I started off my career very much as a technocrat, figuring out how to get the most out of people as things, and came over time to realize that that was abominably incomplete. I mean, horribly incomplete. And so is this an us and them situation? Like, are there people who are industrialists and then there are people who are not? Or is this like a contagious idea that we can help to spread?
I would say that it's us and us, not us and them. That the normal state of humanity for 100,000 years was to be humanity. Marshall Sahlins made his career writing about the fact that cavemen only worked 2 hours a day. I'm not talking about less work, but I am talking about less drudgery. What happened as the Industrial Revolution hit is first they offered prizes. They said to people, you can barely get by as a small landholder farmer, or you can come to this factory and do this unnatural work, but you will get paid 4 times as much. And you can feed your family better, and you can raise in status in the community. And then it's the industrialists who built public school, and public school that indoctrinated all of us into this idea of will this be on the test and churning it out to the point where getting that sticker on your parents' car was what high school was even for. So I think that was a sticky and contagious idea, that there are prizes in exchange for your drudgery. But what happened is the value that humans can add by racing to the bottom keeps going down. Productivity is the lowest it's been since they began measuring it in 2022. And part of the reason for that is you just can't make the machine person cyborg go any faster. What we do have the opportunity to do is go back to where we were, back to our past, to create a future where we say, now that we have all the tools, now that everyone already owns the means of production, that supercomputer in your pocket, what we make isn't stuff. What we make is decisions. And making a decision is different than turning the machine and cranking it to make another widget.
I wonder if we aren't moving into a new phase in terms of where the economy is going. Recently, we had Joe Pine on the show, and he talks about sort of the progression of economic value from goods to products to services to experiences. And as a larger and larger proportion of the economy becomes services and then experiences and then transformations, it seems to me that there's a completely different model for working that is not as industrial.
Exactly, because there isn't enough juice left in turning up the machine. If we're just going to be Austrian economists about this, I can't make an air fryer for less than $79. I just can't. It cannot be done no matter how hard every human works. What are you going to do? Make it for $7? Because we went from 790 to 79, but you can't get another order of magnitude out of the air fryer. So where does value get created? It gets created in community and possibility, and in giving the fact that there are more people alive right now who have a roof over their head and enough to eat, giving those people something to transact for that is additive, not scarcity-based.
Here's a big idea in front of us, and this is a big idea that we want to spread. So I'm going to reach into this is marketing, and I'm going to ask some of the questions about this idea that you raise in This Is Marketing. So starting small, who do you start with this?
Okay, so let's talk about mass for just a minute. Mass is an accident of history that's gone. So where would I say mass began? Maybe mass began with the Mona Lisa. The reason the Mona Lisa is the most famous painting in the world is because it was stolen right when newspapers were hitting their stride. And she was on the front page of newspapers around the world for months. And if we go from there, the early 1900s, to today, we see this arc of mass media, which you had to pay attention to as an industrialist, because if you could figure out how to get everyone to buy Heinz ketchup, you could win. But we just blew up mass media, and it's probably not coming back. And manufacturing has shifted, so we don't have to make everything the same. It's just as cheap to make everything a little different. So if we don't have mass markets and we don't have mass manufacturing, we end up with pockets of people who care and everyone else who is completely ignoring us. So the smallest viable audience for this idea is a pocket of people, the 5 people at your plant who are ready to do this, the 12 people in your community who you can connect. Now that we have access to 2, 3, 5 billion people, finding the others is so much easier. But we have, again, been brainwashed into thinking if it's not on the front page of the paper, it doesn't count. But in fact, almost all the shifts in our lives begin with the smallest viable audience and maybe, perhaps, show up on the front page years later, but probably not.
is this an idea that needs to be on both sides of the equation? So one side is the people working, and the other side is the people who are running the company. And I recognize that that dichotomy is a little bit false in this model because this is a collaborative effort between everybody. But still, today we're starting off with two sides of the equation. Do both sides need to get it?
Okay, so we need to talk a little bit about high stakes and trust. If I am going to do something that is really high stakes, like take a pharmaceutical or fly across the country, I can't trust the human being I have never met with my life. If I am saying, fly the plane any way you want. Oh, you're a mechanic? I trust you. Fix the plane any way you want. We need to manage these processes. There has to be surveillance. The industrial economy depends on surveillance and management to make sure that human beings act like machines. And when it's high stakes and low trust, we really don't have much of a choice. But leadership cannot live there. That's why the airlines have been stuck for 100 years. 50 years. They can't change anything because they don't have leadership. They just have management. Leadership explores the liminal space between here and there. It is about figuring out tomorrow, not optimizing yesterday. In those settings, leaders can look at these commitments and say, I want to work with people who will hold me to this because I want to hold them to that. And that is a compact that can be made. If we compare what Satya Nadella has done, Microsoft, to what many of the other big tech companies have done, he has said, I'm not Steve Ballmer. I'm not going to bully people, and I'm not going to race to the bottom. We are here to look for possibility. Whereas there are other giant tech companies that can only have 20, 30, 40,000 people, and no one even notices because they've just filled it with layers of obedient cogs, as opposed to the people who can change everything and who have the freedom to do so.
There's this sort of minimum viable that we can get out there, and it can be incredibly small. But we need to find people for whom this satisfies a dream of theirs.
Yes.
And for whom this is making a promise that they want to see kept. Who are those people, or do we need to know? Maybe it's enough to get it out there and they'll find it.
Okay, so let's talk about false proxies for a second. And I see that, like me, you are a fan of Isabel Wilkerson. False proxies have led to enormous economic harm, but also to our caste system, to so much social injustice, to misogyny, and many other things. The way I do the math is this. If you go to the supermarket and want to buy an avocado, or let's pick a branded item, it's better, want to buy some hummus, you're not allowed to open the container and eat the hummus in the store. You have to make a judgment before you buy it. How do you do that? You do it by the label. That's why food labeling works, because if you trust Heinz or Cedar or whoever it is, you can buy it again tomorrow. That's a useful proxy. A false proxy is, this person looks a lot like me, they're cute, I might even date them, and they interview well. Therefore, I can hire them to make brownies. There's no connection here. But we have been using these false proxies to choose people. And it reinforces status roles. It reinforces privilege that we went to a famous college or whatever it is, even though there's no actual connection to whether they can do the work. So to give you an aside, and you probably know part of the story, Grayston Bakery, started by Bernie Glassman, is 4 miles from where I am right now. And if you've ever bought Ben & Jerry's ice cream, they made the brownies in the Ben & Jerry's ice cream. They make more brownies than any other facility in the world. But the reason that Grayston matters is that they have pioneered and proselytized open hiring. If you want a job making brownies at Grayston, you walk into their office and there's a clipboard. You put your name and phone number on the clipboard, and then you leave. And when a job opens, the next person on the list gets the job. Doesn't matter if you're formerly incarcerated. Doesn't matter if you used to be a drug addict. The next person on the list gets the job. Then there's 3 weeks of training. And if you can't cut it, you can't stay. And then you work there. And if you can't cut it, you can't stay. But if you stay and you're good at making brownies, everybody wins. So the Body Shop adopted this, and their turnover went down 60%, and their productivity went up 15% across the entire chain of their stores. So the question is, Why don't more companies do this? And the answer is because we like the illusion of control. We like believing that as a manager, we somehow have magical vibes that can tell good employees from bad ones, even though there's no track record to indicate that that is correct. And so the purpose of the story is to highlight how uncomfortable it makes us to give this up as we seek to find people to dance with. It doesn't matter what the outside looks like, what the label is. It matters what the story someone tells himself is.
I completely agree with that assessment, which is, and also, I can't even tell you how much is invested in trying to read those labels. And in fact, one of the things that I argue against is that the history of work has been about treating employees as an input to production. And so a crabby one and sort of a difficult one, and also a very obscure one, because we can't see what's in your head and you're more complex. Each of us is more complex than the whole company. So we've used tools from psychology to try to assess and try to motivate people. And I'd like to change that whole story. I'd like to change the whole story to, instead of making people the object of study, let's make work the object of study. Let's actually, which is what you've done, which is what do people really want from work, so that we can work on making that better instead of focusing on the psychology of people.
Yes, well said. What I wrote on the back of my book, instead of blurbs, it says, the purpose of a beehive isn't to make honey. Honey is a byproduct of a healthy hive. And so if you can build a healthy hive, which doesn't mean you give things away. In fact, in a healthy hive, your people are working harder because they want to. The honey will come. But the short-term profit seeker says, well, I got to make the stock price go up tomorrow. So I will make this place an unhappy place because in the short run, my stock options will be worth more.
Yeah, lately I've heard the word a lot, extractive, and the extractive nature of work. My daughter recently moved from working for the schools to working for an ed tech company that works on emotional intelligence, essentially. And she says she cannot believe that in moving from being a teacher to this other job, that she's not spending all of her free time recovering. And in fact, so much of what she was having to do as a teacher was deal with surveillance, which was essentially prove to me that you're working. And so that's something that you talk about in this book, which is that the degree to which the industrial model is a surveillance model.
And Shoshana's book, Surveillance Capitalism, is primarily about surveilling the user. But what we now have is Amazon announced something which lets anyone who's using the cloud to manage their call center have an AI listen in on every single conversation. The moment that an operator says something inappropriate or shows stress in their voice, a manager's thing lights up and they can pounce in real time to deal with that person. Well, that's human resources in a nutshell.
You had a statistic. Amazon lost a quarter of its annual profits to turnover in 2021. So that doesn't seem to be a profitable approach.
Back to the race to the bottom thing. If Amazon had decided back when Jeff was getting going that everything was going to cost 50 cents more, there would have been a buffer to create the single best job anybody ever had. That would have been all that was necessary. But if you're going to go that close to the bone, you have to realize there are bones involved.
So when it comes to spreading a message like this, you've mentioned in one of your other works that people are not rational actors. And so making a pitch that is rational doesn't necessarily work. What is the irrational thing that will trigger the right choice here?
I think what we are seeing is there are people who the indoctrination did not work on, who want agency and who want responsibility and who are seeking meaning. And what we did was we gave all of those people a laptop. That doesn't mean those people need to start their own company, but they need to find each other. And when they find each other, the connections among them can create communities of practice inside or outside of organizations. And as their leverage increases, they will have more influence, and either an entity will want to deal with them or not. And I'm reminded of a whole bunch of things that happened to me at Yahoo after they bought my company I was there for about a year at the peak of the internet. And one of the conversations I had was with the co-founder. And I went to him and I said, look, we're busy buying companies for $2-3 billion at a time. Why don't I just take two people? I'll cut my pay 90%. We'll go across the street to a $400 a month office and we'll build those companies and you can buy them for free because you'll already own them. And Jerry turned to me and he said, I would dearly love to do that, but then everyone would want to do that. And I was like, that's not a good excuse. Sorry. And it was not because of me and their missed opportunity with me, but the truth is they started to fall apart because they were just making the stock price go up and not building Google and all the rest that followed because they thought their job was to do their job, not to serve their users and their employees.
You talk about this group of people, and I do think this is the market. This is the market that already recognizes itself as not an input to production, that expects to lead a life in which they are engaged whole. But there's also an incredible number of us, I think, who have agreed that we are an input to production and have been manufacturing ourselves through the education systems to be that thing. It feels like there's a long production line that some people just somehow failed to get on.
There's going to be so much soft tissue damage in the next few years as the bottom falls out of the industrial economy. So I was sitting with 5 kids who were between 10 and 12. All of them were good students. And I took out this little drinking bird toy. I think you can visualize it. It goes back and forth and it dips its head into the thing. I said, set it up and it's going. And I said, all right, how does it work? You can ask me questions, but I'd like you to describe to me how you think it works. And they looked at it for a couple minutes and then they turned to me and they took out their pencils and they said, tell us. Like, we're ready to write down the answer. I said, no, that's the indoctrination. Kids of privilege growing up with access to good schools, ready to take notes. And that's not normal for humans. And there are people who have fought against it. When a kid has a mild case of ADD, we don't say there's something wrong with the school. We say, here's some medicine. But there's nothing wrong with them. It's just that they don't fit in to the educational industrial complex, which was built by industrialists to train people to do nasty factory work. So we have to unindoctrinate a whole generation because this new generation is saying, I've seen the deal you offered my parents. You didn't keep your half of the deal, so I'm not going to keep mine.
There's a funny thing that happens inside large companies, especially companies that are prestigious, which is, I would love to throw out for instance, the performance management process, which is very much, are you fitting into the box? And everybody in the company hates it, but everybody in the company needs it, or at least a large percentage, because they're accustomed to getting grades. They've been getting grades their whole life. They've been working toward grades their whole life. And some companies have thrown it out, but it's almost like being controlled by the population because people want their grade. This is what they've been trained their whole lives to want.
Right. We have to get back to standards because I don't want us to lower our standards to make people feel good. I want us to raise our standards to make people feel good. And that's going to happen when we criticize the work and never criticize the worker. That we have to create an environment where someone says, here, I made this. And then the second sentence has to be, can you make it better? Because if we can create those cycles, because we can connect to anybody we want, whenever we want now, the quality of what we make is going to go up so fast. But instead, we have these fake meetings that aren't actually meetings. And we have these processes that take a very long time. And everyone's trying to make their grades go up because it's about the worker. But important, meaningful work is about the work, and the workers get to be people.
That's something I hadn't picked up before. I've thought about work a lot as a product that we are selling to people who work there, which is that the job is the product. But you're actually also pointing out that we need to make the whole point of it the outcome, which is the outcome of the work. It's a really important point. How's this book of one piece with your previous books?
So I was lucky enough to show up when marketing and advertising stopped being the same thing. Because before that, marketing was advertising. So when I started writing about marketing, I got to decide what marketing was. And I decided that what marketing was telling a true story to people who want to hear it that changes them somehow. And everything I've done has been part of that because I don't care about selling more widgets. I really don't. I don't know how to get a better open rate on the emails you want to send. I don't care. What I do care about is changing other people for the better. So if you look at my work, it all sort of rhymes in that respect. But if people are looking for a good way to make their stock price go up tomorrow, I don't have it for them.
Yeah. Well, this is definitely a book that is telling people something true that can change them. I can very much see that. I think a lot of the other books are about marketing, but this has actually gone beyond that, and it is the change as opposed to how to make the change. That is a fundamental difference in it. What's the Carbon Almanac?
Okay, so this changed my life, and it also led to this book. I read Kim Stanley Robinson's book, Ministry for the Future, which I can't recommend strongly enough. It was a punch to the gut and a hug to my soul. And I realized I hadn't been talking about the climate on my blog very much, even though I first wrote about climate change 15 or 20 years ago, because I felt stupid. I felt like a hypocrite. I didn't know enough. I thought, well, if I don't know enough, I bet other people don't either. So I took off a year and a half of my life. It cost me a lot of money. And I volunteered and organized 300 people. It's now 1,800, 1,900 in 40 countries. And together, without meeting once, even in Zoom, we never had one group Zoom meeting. We wrote, edited, typeset, laid out, fact-checked, footnoted a 97,000-word almanac of the climate. So we didn't assert anything. We just said, here's all the things that are true. You can go look them up. And we helped translate it into Italian and Korean and Chinese and Japanese and on and on. And it won a worldwide award. It is a foundational text for what we know about this world that we live in. But was also, I was surprised to discover, a huge wake-up call for me about what happens when you give people a chance to matter. Because we were all volunteers. I couldn't hire somebody or fire somebody. All I could do was create the condition for them to do what they wanted to do in the first place. And some people worked on it for an hour, and some people worked on it for 1,000 hours. And we had turnover, and we welcomed it. Because if it wasn't for you, if the stage we were in wasn't lighting you up, please go do something else important. But if this is what you need to do, here's a runway. Let's dance together. And if 300 people can make an award-winning reference book in 5 months, better than any paid team could, then what else could we do? And so that is what began this whole cycle.
How did you kindle the original group?
So I invited a dozen people so that we could model what the culture would be like. We built it in discourse, not Discord. Discord gives me a headache, but discourse. And then I wrote a blog post and I said, if this is the kind of thing you're interested in, fill out this Google form. And I went through the Google form and I picked people solely based on diversity. Diversity of background, diversity of location, diversity of whatever I could find. And I invited 400 people to come join the discourse, and a few hundred showed up. And every once in a while, I'd invite in another couple hundred people, and that was it. And we said to people, you can invite a friend. So it wasn't just people who read my blog. It wasn't about me. And I didn't write it, and I didn't boss anybody around. I simply created the situation, and then I was there as the maintainer of consistency and chief cheerleader.
That's incredible. What a great, great story that is. That is amazing. I have 3 questions at closing that I usually ask. One of them is, what job do you hire your work to do for you?
Oh, I love this question. That's going to be the title of your book, Dart.
Yes.
Good. I am super, super lucky. I had a huge head start from birth, but selling a company to Yahoo in 1999, good timing. And so I've hired my work ever since to do 2 things. Give me a feeling of contribution, that I am turning on lights for people who want them turned on, And two, satisfying my need for a combination of meaning and stimulation. That if I went to the amusement park all day, I might find stimulation but no meaning. And if I went into a monastery for a silent retreat, I might find meaning but no stimulation. And I need both of those things. And I'm just so thrilled that people give me the benefit of the doubt and let me dance this dance.
I would love to sort of think through the radar that you have, your perceptual system that finds those veins that lead off in those directions, right? Those are fascinating. What does it cost you?
I'm trying to strip away the things that cost me the most. And I'm doing a better job of it. I've done 140 books because I did 120 as a book packager. And I never missed a deadline. I've never gone over budget once. I've had hundreds of employees and I've never had a layoff. So more than once, we've had to shut down the whole thing. And I take it really seriously when I make a promise. And what I'm trying to do is still make audacious promises to people, but not make ones that will erode my well-being to keep them. And that's one reason I have no employees, not one, because I just can't shepherd somebody through so many of the dislocations we have right now in a way that I feel would be adequate to the promise I would have to make.
Yeah. Where can people learn more about you?
Well, that's the easiest question. Seth.blog/song. So Seth.blog/bot is an AI that will answer any question you can ask it based on my writing. And Seth.blog is 9,000 blog posts or 8,000. And Seth.blog/song is a bunch of videos, some swag, and where you can find out more about the book.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, you're a trooper and a scholar, and it has been extra fun. Thank you for doing it.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of Work for Humans. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts. And share the show with one person you think would get value from it. Believe it or not, this really helps us grow the show and reach more people who want to build the kind of work that people really want. As always, thank you to my producer, Jason Ames at Ninth Path Audio for his insights into content and his high standard for quality. Final note, the opinions shared here are my own and not the views of Google or Cisco Systems. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.